Welcome to the DFS pregame show here on RotoGrinders. I'm Jordan Cooper, aka blenderhd, blenderhd. You can find me there on Twitter. And this is the show where we kind of go over a little bit about yesterday's slate, a little bit about today's slate, answer a bunch of questions, our strategy questions in the YouTube chat, because I can see you there. I see you, YouTube chat people: Kevin Copeland, Chris Clark, Quinn Williams, Daniel Hutchings, GR Sauceda 12, Jupocalypse, Go Sox Bro, Tom, probably Meat Plow in there. It's always Mr. Plow's always there, Mr. Meat Plow. He's always there. And it's because it's Mondays. You know what we do on Mondays? It's Mondays with McCool, James McCool, the co-author with me of The Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports, 15-hour audio masterclass, teaching you the entire game theory of DFS at theoryofdfs.com. But James, everyone has to hit the thumbs up button. Okay, I always say hit the thummy thumbs to keep the apple juice cold. But everyone hit the thummy thumbs because James is now a new dad, right? Congratulations.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it is definitely a thumbs up situation for me. I've wanted to be a dad since I was 12 or something like that. So
who wants to be a dad at 12?
Dude, I was born to be a dad. All right. I'm really, really good at taking care of people. I'm really, really good at just caring about others, being empathetic, and just I want to teach people things. That's my whole thing. So having a kid, I can just teach him everything. Are you going to teach
your kid to play DFS better than you?
Yeah, I already made him a Draftkings account. Are you kidding? Yeah, of course.
He can't play. He has to wait. There's an age limit.
Well, he's going to be ready when that age limit hits. But yeah, I mean, I'm gonna teach him everything that I know about decision theory and math and stuff like that. He's going to be awesome. So I'm really excited to start this journey, and I am thankful that it was very quick and that the process was not terrible for Margaret either. And we're already pretty much back to now, I guess, what is regular adult life and regular parent life. So very, very happy to have a kid now. It's cool.
And you named your kid a tongue twister. Was your last name Damascus McCool?
Damascus
say
Gideon
that 5
McCool.
times fast.
Damascus Gideon McCool.
What made you choose Damascus?
It is a name. So when it comes to names, I'm really big on having something that is unique and inspires confidence. I didn't want
your name, James, very unique.
No, not like my name, James. That was the point. My grandma was like, why didn't you just name him James? I'm one, I'm not going to name my kid James Jr. because that's not my thing. And two, it's a common name. I didn't want him to have a common name. I wanted to have something that he could own and that would inspire confidence and would inspire longevity and strength. And that's, I think that does that really, really well.
And what would be the nickname? I'm always trying to think, because my mother wanted to name me Percival.
Damn, that'd be awesome.
Because she had the same thing. My parents were the same way. Back in 1979, Jordan was not a common name. Yeah. My sister's name is Logan. So they wanted to do the same thing of making unique names or at least less common names.
Yeah.
But my father had to slap some sense into her about Percival and say, Percival is the type of name that kids will make fun of. Percy, it's one of those, it's just one of those names. So he convinced her to switch to Jordan at least.
Yeah.
Because you have to think in terms of when you the way that the name, the Damascus McCool, I don't think you can make fun. I don't think you can make fun of Damascus, but what would be the nickname?
So we're probably going to call him either Dame or D. Both of those are really, really easy. And I'm sure that we'll parents come up with nicknames for their kids that but maybe don't even relate to their first name or their middle name or whatever. But I think that Dame is probably the one that I'll stick to the most. And when it comes to kids making fun of other kids for their names, they'll make fun of anything. A third grader will make fun of any name, and it doesn't even matter. So when I'm thinking names, that doesn't even cross my mind. I just want something that he can be really, really just happy and unique to have and feel special for having it. So Like, as much as I understand like why your parents were like, no, Percival, they'll make fun of him for it. It's just like Percival's a badass name. Like that's a cool name.
Maybe
And
now it is. Maybe now
well,
Percival.
I am now going to call you Percival. So there you go. That's the new name.
No, because imagine like that race car driver, what, Dick Trickle? Like, he must have had a horrible, horrible childhood.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where, but like, if you get made fun of a whole bunch as a kid for your name, there's two different routes, right? Like, you can either hate that name, or you can have such a vengeance that children made fun of you that as an adult you just own it, and that you're just like, yeah, my name is Dick Trickle. You got a problem with it, and then if people do, then you fight them, and that's the way that adulthood goes for
Well,
you.
it also depends on your build, whatever. I'm a scrawny Jewish guy, so like,
Okay, well, that's fair.
right, people are gonna pick on me.
I mean, Jordan or Percival, I can see Percival fitting you pretty well. Like, I could call you Percy, and that would be good. And so that's what we're gonna do from now on. On Mondays, it is McCool Mondays with Percy. So there we go.
Right? Hey, as long as I'm winning in the DFS lobbies, I don't care what you call me.
That's all that matters
anymore. Right?
That's the thing. Like, as soon as you hit adulthood, who cares? Like, you can be called like the fluffy or whatever. Like, who cares? Fluffy? As long as you're successful in what you're doing, it doesn't matter.
Right. It doesn't matter. Well, what does matter is NBA DFS. We're coming up on the All-Star break, which is a little bit shorter this year. So what? We're the last game is on Thursday, and then it's going to be Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and then they're back. Mm-hmm. Personally, I don't know why they're even bothering with an all-star game.
So stupid. Stupid.
I mean, to me, this is what you need to plan on about a week and a half from now. Half the games on the slate being canceled due to COVID protocols. Because but what, you're going to take stars from all the teams and all in one place, and then send them back to their teams, and hopefully nothing happens. Right? So I don't know, but with the All-Star break coming up, we don't have the situation. I mean, we normally don't where, I mean, we see players rest all the time regardless. So it's not I mean, like when it comes up on Wednesday, Thursday, we have to assume that because the players that aren't playing in the All-Star game are going to have 5 days off, that it's quite possible that we'll have everyone available, and same when they come back. I'm just trying to kind of prep for like the late season, because we have baseball coming up, obviously, and then we'll get into like the silly season of NBA. Even though this whole season seems like silly season.
Yeah, this has been March NBA DFS since the beginning of the year.
Yeah, but imagine March NBA DFS now in this season.
I don't want to. I'm just going to hibernate. I'm just going to take March off. Like, I'm not going to do anything except for play Counter-Strike. That's all.
But what it highlights, though, is that, do you think that in a season like this, or very similar to late season NBA normally, that the same game correlations are a bit stronger? Because we also have seen a lot more blowouts this season. And a lot of people ask me, like, well, should I make groups? And should I always try to play players from the same game, the opposite sides of the game? Like on today's slate, we have Dallas and Orlando. That if you're going to play Vooch and Luka together, or Richardson or something, like trying to fit more of that type of correlation, which is still weak. I still admit that all of these correlations are weak, but they do exist. That it's more beneficial this season, or when it's silly time, than normal. Because what ends up happening, we see so many times that people are in our Discord, which you could sign up if you're a premium member. Hit one of the links in the description below for $10 off your first month. That we're constantly rooting for games to be close. Like, we're just kind of like, it's the third quarter, one team's down by 18, and you're like, either you have a starter on the winning side or the losing side, and all you're hoping for is I want full minutes, so please just keep it close enough that everyone gets their last rotation of some type. And with that much prevalence on, can these games stay close, shouldn't we focus more, not like entirely, but more on these same game correlations, even if we do have to set hard rules on it, because we have what, like on this slate, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games. Because it's quite possible that 3 out of these 7 games turn into blowouts. 4 out of these 7 games that starters will not play their last rotation. So don't you think that that makes it even more important that if you condense, I said this on a previous show, that if I were to play like Indianapolis, Philly, like if I were to play whoever, Brogdon, if he plays, and Embiid, like wouldn't it make sense to just play them in the same lineup? So like if that game blows out, if that something happens or whatever, like that whole lineup just gets burned. But if it does go, if it does go to double overtime, I'm great. But do you think I'm over prioritizing it like that? To me, I don't know where that fine line is, because I know the same game, the two sides of a game correlation does exist, but I'm hesitant to just tell people like that. No, they should be forcing that in. But I mean, I tend to do so when I hand build, and I do make player groups like that when I do multi-entry builds. Do you think I'm doing it too much, or do you think the field isn't doing it enough?
So it's one of the things that I like to do is when we have players that are going to be very popular. Typically what happens is, somebody gets ruled out, or there's a starter that is going to be too cheap and they're very, very popular, or a team in general is just too underpriced and people are very on them. Like maybe people yesterday with Charlotte or something had a lot of LaMelo Ball and a lot of Terry Rozier and like not a lot of the other team. I do think that there is something valuable to taking one player from the other team, because if you have 2 players from one team, you absolutely need that game to stay close. Otherwise, like they're shot. So if it stays close, then that means that the other team is also playing well enough to have it be close. And you hope that it goes over the implied total. I think that one of the things I like to do is when we have a team with 2 or 3 or 4 popular guys, I like to be different by forcing in one of the players from the other team. Because like you said, there are so many blowouts this year. And at first it felt like in the first month and a half, I remember you and I talking and saying, oh, well, don't predict blowouts. Like there's
no, but I did no, hold on. I know that I don't predict blowouts, but if I'm correlating my lineups, I'm not predicting. I think the clarity here is out of these 7 games today, I'm not going to predict what
no,
teams are going to blow out at all.
I'm getting to that. And I'm getting
get to it then.
Yeah. So I'm getting to that. Like earlier, there have been a lot of blowouts, and like you shouldn't predict blowouts. Absolutely not. So one of the things about that is like if you think that games are blowing out more often, then you absolutely should be trying to prioritize single game environments, because if the game doesn't blow out, then your assumption is that it probably has a leg up on 1 or 2 other games on the slate. I do admit that it is a weak correlation, and I prefer to do it to gain some relative value because people don't game stack enough. But I think that one of the reasons why you do it is mostly because people think that there will be a blowout. That's my favorite way to do it, is targeting a game that people think will blow out. Like people thought that the Sixers were going to blow out the Cavs the other night. And so that they were like, oh, I don't want to play Embiid because it's going to be a blowout. Just like, one, you don't know that it's going to be a blowout. And 2, if people are going to be lower on Embiid in this spot where he projects super duper well, then you should absolutely be forcing him in with the Cavs value, with Dean Wade and with Darius Garland and those guys, because people don't do it enough. So I think that I would probably lean towards the side of the field is not doing it enough and you are doing it just enough. I think there is value in it. I don't force it when I game stack, or I don't force it when I hand build. Because if one player, I remember specifically there was one situation where Jason Tatum projected way better than Zion Williamson. And I had the other side of that Pelicans game. I had a couple players. It was when Detroit was super value. It was like DSJ and Saban Lee and Josh Jackson. going up against Pelicans with the Spurs value. And I considered very strongly going with Zion Williamson, because if the Detroit value is going to get there, it's because they played a full game. But I went with Jason Tatum because he was projected for 9 points, 10 points above Zion. And if I would have gone Zion, then it would have been a huge day. So sometimes I kick myself on stuff like that, but I know the correlations are so low that it's hard for me to make that decision. There's a large projection discrepancy. So I guess
you're not going to make it up in a 10-point. You're not going to make. You're not going to sacrifice 10 points.
Yeah,
For the
yeah.
sake
I'm
of
not going to
for the sake of
sacrifice that.
Right. But I think that's the key of seeing what sacrifice you're making in projection in order to get that correlation. That's why if it's a difference of a point, to me, it's like I'm going to side with the correlation. It's all these types of things I view as like tiebreaker levels, like 55-45 type of levels, right? Like in your instance with Tatum or Zion, it's like I'm not going to sacrifice 10 points in median just for the sake of having a guy on the other side of the game. Like it's just not going to happen. But if you're left with I could play any of these small forwards and they're all projected somewhere around each other. Like, well, is there anyone on the opposite side of any of the other players that you have in your lineup? Then take that. And Alex Santi brought up a very, very good point. Game stacking. And when we say game stacking, we're not talking about taking 7 guys from a game.
No, like 4.
Game stacking literally could be one guy from one side and one guy from the other side. That could literally be a game stack. It could be 2 and 1. It could be 3 and 2. It doesn't have to be a ton, but a lot of times it's just 1-1 or 2-1 or something like that. Game stacking in NBA is weaker the larger the slate gets, the more options we get, which is very different from baseball. In MLB, the more games that there are, the more you should be stacking. But that's the nuances of why, because correlation in NBA is weak and correlation in MLB is extremely strong. Because in MLB, you have to think in terms of if there's a 15-game slate, there's now 30 teams that have the chance of putting up 12, 15 runs, and there's more of them. You don't know which one it's going to be. It's more likely to be the better teams, but you never know. Pirates show up every once in a while. The Marlins, that's how I win. So with 30 teams on the slate, well, one of them, and if any team goes off at 10 plus runs, like that stack wins. Like that's the way it happens in baseball because of correlation. In basketball, if we had a 14-game slate, like still you could have 6 blowouts and no games go to overtime. They could be the size of the slate doesn't matter. There's not one game's going to have 320 points in it. No, most likely none of them are going to have that, right? Baseball has no time limit, right? If one pitcher gets blown up, they could blow up for 13 runs in 1 inning. Like it can't happen in basketball like that. So, the smaller the slate, obviously, if there's only 4 games on the slate, now if you happen to pick the one that is good and the other 3 suck, like then you want as many pieces of that game as possible, but only because there's so limited options. But when you have 10 games, 11 games on an NBA slate, like we get to the question, like I said to you, how much projection are you willing to sacrifice for the sake of this weak correlation? When you have a 3-game slate, 4-game slate, what other options do you have? I mean, like what would the options be if that situation with Tatum and Zion? Like if it wasn't 10 points, if it was like 2 points. Like, but then who else are you going to play? If you don't play Tatum and you don't play Zion, who else is available? It's a 3 or 4 game slate. Who else? I mean, you're going to have to play one of them. I mean, probably on a 10-game slate, there's going to be other options. There's going to be many more options for you to play. So the importance of having like 2 sides of a game, 2 ones are less prevalent, but only because the correlations are weaker. I always have to say weak correlations don't necessarily, oh, well, I want to gain as much correlation as possible. It's like, yeah, within reason, those 3 levers are projection, correlation, and leverage. So you're always pulling those levers. So whichever makes sense in your lineup, and sometimes you have to see, is the correlation worth the projection? Is it worth the leverage? Is the leverage worth the projection, right? That's the number one thing that you're thinking of. Do I play the guy that's projected for 1 billion points at nothing, right? The stupid chalk, 96% owned. He has, obviously 5,000 underpriced. You can get tons of leverage. You're right. You can get tons of leverage by not playing that guy. But how much leverage are you getting in your lineups that you're sacrificing 25 points in median for? It probably is not going to be worth it. It's most likely not going to be worth it. So even though, yes, you can get leverage that way, you may be sacrificing way too much to do so. So all these things are in that, I don't want to say it looks like I'm milking cows or something like that. These are levers. These are level 1, lever 2, lever 3. So I know a lot of people treat NBA almost like there is no correlation. But I think a lot of people get burned because they're putting lineups together that have no semblance of correlation, and then a game blows out, a guy gets injured, someone comes in what I call infect, you end up having someone that infects too many of your lineups. That's why I when I build 60 to 80 lineups. I think I force it too much. I admit that I force it too much sometimes. That I look at the winning lineup and it's all the players that I played, except for in all of my X lineups, I had this guy. I couldn't have made the lineup that won. I couldn't have actually made because I couldn't play these two together and it would have made that guy as the center. And I think over the long run, I have come out ahead doing so. But I still don't think forcing it in, because I say that I'll make 30 groups and people think, oh, I need to make 30 groups too. And I always need to qualify with that the correlation, this 0.1 correlation, positive correlation coefficient, it shouldn't make or break your lineups. If you should have lineups that don't take advantage of it. Right? You don't have to get every little thing. But since I come from large field GPPs, I'm used to trying to get every little edge and advantage that I can. But then we get into, well, can I play this guy with that guy? Can I play this guy with this guy? It's the correlations are so weak that, yes, it lowers your probability by about this much. But if you're spending so much time on, can I play this guy with this guy? Just don't worry about it. If you get to the point where you're I'm not sure, then play them together. Don't play them together. Make a group. Don't make a group. I don't think in basketball, in other sports it's different, but in basketball, although we're talking about these same game correlations, James, when you build a bunch of lineups, when you're multi-entering, let me ask you this, in your system, do you even include a correlation coefficient into even building the lineups?
No. I've thought about it. I remember something that Matthew Friedman at Fantasy Labs wrote a long time ago about the correlation between DeMarcus Cousins and who did he play with at the Kings? Point guard. Played for the Celtics, plays for Atlanta right now. I can't remember his name. He's old. Anyway, whatever.
Jeff Teague?
No.
I didn't even play NBA DFS when Cousins was on the Kings.
Why
if you're asking me any questions about that, I have no idea. Because before DFS, I played DFS. I didn't watch basketball. So
I can't remember his name. Anyway, so Friedman wrote an article about the correlation between them and trying to figure out if there was any reason to play them together or apart. And what it came down to is if there are players that are robust, it doesn't really matter correlation-wise what you are doing with them or their teammates. If you have a player that can get there through multiple different categories, a Mike Conley or a Luka Doncic or something like that, where those guys are contributing in a whole bunch of different ways, then they're not going to have negative correlation that's strong enough with their teammates to where it's going to really matter that much in the EV of your lineup. However, when you're looking at, playing Danny Green and Seth Curry together on the Sixers, it's just those guys do the exact same thing. And they pretty much, they're make or break on points. So finding your ceiling, if both of them are to find their ceiling, that means that both of them have to have significant usage on a team where Embiid exists and where Ben Simmons exists and Tobias Harris exists. And if two guys who do the exact same thing just score points, if that's their ceiling, I do try to avoid those guys because I know that it's much less likely that they both have ceiling games shooting. I do the same thing with a center and a backup center. Like there's only so many minutes that true centers can play. There's only a finite amount of rebounds that can happen in a game, and a true center is going to be unlocked by their rebounds. So if a player has a very skinny route towards their ceiling, they only contribute in one, maybe two small ways. And there are multiple players on a team that do that. I try to avoid those guys together, but it's not really something. People will ask me two players on the same team just because they're on the same team. And it's just like that it's fine. Like Halliburton gets assists. You can play him with Hield. Harrison Barnes.
Technically, I mean, James, technically, if you want to go to all technicality, two players on the same team have to be negatively correlated. To some extent, right? They have to be.
I don't think that's true. I don't think that's right.
Negatively correlated. If De'Aaron Fox hits a basket, it's one that Bagley can't have, right?
Right, but Bagley could get an assist on it.
And what happens if he doesn't? Then he's negatively correlated.
I
mean, we take a look at football, right? If one receiver gets a pass, the other two receivers have to be negatively correlated. Now,
no, that is true. That is true.
Right. On a play, I think the difference that we're talking about, and this is why if you're looking at like a correlation chart, there are a lot of correlations. We have one at RotoGrinders.
Yeah.
If you want to look at it, that's fine. I don't even bother because I don't care about medians. I don't care. Yes, your points are more correlative to another player's points. At a median, yes. If we're going by the 50th percentile, I get it. But the whole point is we need to score 80th percentiles. We need ceiling results. So, like what you said with the two, if you have two corner three shooters, right? You mentioned Danny Green and Seth Curry, guys that Duncan Robinson and like 3-point shooters that essentially. I mean, I always view Klay Thompson that way also on the Warriors.
Yep.
So it's like I would never play Steph Curry and Klay Thompson together.
This year it's Kelly Oubre and Andrew Wiggins.
Right. Well, there you go. There's another right. Guys that in order for them to hit 7Xs on their scores, on their salaries, they're 6 or 7K. So you need like 45, 50 points. Like it's unlikely that they're both doing it. They could, but it's less likely, less probable that they're going to do it together because every 3-pointer that Oubre takes one shot attempt away from Wiggins, and it's a timed game. Like it's not like baseball where there's no time limit. So they can go through that order 9 times if they want to, right? So that everyone starts getting correlated to one another. But in basketball, there's only so many shots to go around. There's only so many. And how many assists are they going to be on those certain shots? Not as much to care about, right? So if you told me a team was going to take a total of 85 shots, like every shot that one player takes is negatively correlated to all the other players on the team. It has to be because that guy took a shot. Now, does it turn into a rebound? Now, if it turns into a rebound, that means the guy that took the shot didn't make it. So those points aren't correlated to one another, right? So what I'm trying to say is that these same play type of correlations to me don't matter. I just need to know can De'Aaron Fox and Buddy Hield both get 7x their score? Now it depends on their price, right? So if De'Aaron Fox is 8,000, can he get 56 points in the same game that Buddy Hield at 6,000 gets 42 points? How often does that happen? So whether or not Fox has an assist to a Hield, what do I care? And I don't care if they're correlated. Let's say for Fox and Hield were correlated, but correlated when Fox puts up 42 points, Hield puts up 28 points. And yeah, you're right. When they hit 5x value, they're correlated. Okay, I get it. Sure, yeah, that makes sense to me. But I ain't winning a GPP with that. So why would I care about that? I look at Fox and Hield going, I hope Hield shoots badly so Fox takes more shots. So now I don't have Hield in my lineup and I just have Fox, or vice versa. We saw yesterday Hield couldn't miss, right? And Fox didn't hit a ceiling, right? So, I mean, Hield was taking a ton of shots, 3-pointers away from other players on the team. So, like, from a ceiling perspective for the full game, like, most players on the same team are going to be negatively correlated to each other when they're priced efficiently. If they were underpriced, De'Aaron Fox was 4K last night. I don't care about his negative. I don't care. I don't care about the negative correlation at that point, because how many points do I need out of a 4K player? 28? Like, De'Aaron Fox's median is 40. So, like, I'm going to get 10x no matter what happens, pretty much most of the time.
Yeah.
So I think that's the difference. I think that's where people go wrong with asking the questions of, can I play this guy and this guy together? It's like, in all truth, it depends on the salary, and it depends on how correlated both players can hit their ceilings in the same game, not their medians.
Yeah, and that's the right way to think about it. You're right, I guess, that every player would be negatively correlated in some way. I try to think of, in terms of NBA, I try to think of the games, and when I talk about esports DFS, the strict difference between regular sports DFS, NBA and MLB and stuff like that, and esports is that regular sports are in some ways positive sum games, where it, like, one player scoring points, it doesn't necessarily mean that another player is losing points, unless it's like a steal and a turnover in NBA. But in esports, when one player gets a kill, the other player gets a death. Like, that is a straight up zero sum game. Like, then your one side goes up, one side goes down. That's constantly. We don't have that in NBA. So you can have players from the same team and from the same game and stuff like that, where you'll have multiple players be able to find their ceilings. And if a game is, straight up Dogecoin to the moon, like there's 340 real life points scored in that game, it's very likely that most of the starters probably found their ceiling. Because there were so many
games that scored 340 points.
Well, I'm just, it was an arbitrary.
Outliers. I get it. Then the pie has gotten so big that
right.
Everyone can eat from it.
Right.
I get it. Like, I get for those. I'm talking about, like, if it non-outlier situation. Yeah, if they just scored. If we had one of these games on the slate, we have totals in the 215s, 220s, and one team, they have 340 points. Yeah, obviously.
Sure. Yeah,
that's going to happen.
But then the other side of that is the price, like you were mentioning. Players don't have to score 340 real life points if they're all underpriced. We saw it with the Warriors, where I bring up this example all the time. There were 2 slates in a row where I was able to play 5 Warriors in my lineup. 5 Warriors, because they were all like 3,500 or less. It was like Alec Burks and like Damian Jones. It was
last year, right?
It was all the bench players. But they didn't need to score 340 real points. And it didn't matter if they were negatively correlated, because there was like 8 of them playing 40 minutes in these spots where they were all so underpriced that if the Warriors score 100 real life points, that's a great time for those players that play. Like, that, they almost guaranteed to meet value. So it more of the more expensive your combination of players have to be, the more they have to do in those games. Obviously, like, that's the DFS game, but you have to think about in terms and relative of the price of the players. If you are going to be ignoring those correlations, if you're going to be ignoring those negative aspects, if Seth Curry and Danny Green are both 3K and there's no Ben Simmons or Joel Embiid, it's probably fine to play those guys, because they don't have to do a lot, and there's so much more usage going towards them that them being negatively correlated is not as big of a deal. But when they're priced appropriately, maybe they're a couple $100 underpriced, that's when you have to be wary about it. And I wanted to bring up again, when you have a smaller game, when you have a smaller slate, when you have only 4 games, those correlations between players, like, that stuff matters even less, because if you target a game where you have one game go for, I don't know, 250 actual points, it goes way over, it goes in overtime, and then 2 of the other games are blowouts, and you targeted the game that went to overtime, the negative correlations don't even matter, because they scored so many more points and the starters got so many more minutes, that what mattered more was the macro game environment rather than the negative correlation between players.
Right. I mean, and like, this is the weighing of it. Like in
Yeah.
certain cases, the negative correlation matters. In certain cases, it doesn't. And it's especially true because we're talking about very weak correlations. In other sports, that there's no such thing. They're positive. I mean, look at MMA. MMA is the easiest example. Like, you take two fighters from the same fight, like they have to be massively negatively correlated to each other. Because one fighter's going to win and one fighter's going to lose. Yet, for some odd reason, people will roster two guys from the same 3-round fight, and because they think a lot of points are going to be scored. Like, dude, only one player could win. Like, how? I still don't understand. You'll see tons of lineups in MMA. A good 5% of lineups where someone has stacked the first 3 fights of a 10-fight card, 11-fight card. And I just say thank you for why are you donating? Like, how is that possible? I mean, there are instances where the highest scoring loser is in the optimal lineup. So if you're playing, if you're rostering two sides of a fight, of one fight, I still don't do it. But I mean, there is a situation where that happens. Depending, like, all the big favorites win, and then there's no upsets. So basically, the highest scoring loser ends up optimal because of the pricing. But if you're going to roster two, you might as well throw your money. And why? I don't get that. Like that. Like, I don't know if has ever. I mean, I don't think you can have two losers and win a GP. I don't think that's possible. I don't even think that's mathematically possible. Yet you see people do it because of the game, and they're going to punch each other a lot. It's like, yeah, but one guy is not going to get at least 30 points less than, like, the likelihood of the loser of this fight beating out most of the winners of the other fights is so small, but people do it. And that's so massively negatively correlated. That I could understand yelling at you about. Most people are listening to this or watching this going, yeah, it's stupid. When I play MMA DFS, I'm not going to take two guys in the same fight. That's stupid. But to me, I think in NBA, people ask questions as if there is some type of stupid, oh, can you play Danny Green and Seth Curry together? Well, I mean, you can insert, you can, right? And even in situations, James, where they're efficiently priced, everyone's in, right? It's a low total, right? And nothing looked like, you look at Danny Green and you look at Seth Curry and you go, I don't even know why you should be playing them in the first place, even as one-offs, right? Like, it's just, they are who they are. They're like 4,300 or something, and you're like, whatever. And the game happens, and both of them put up 30 plus points. And then you come to me and you go, I thought you said that they can't hit their ceiling in the same. I didn't say they can't. It's that it's at 0%, but it's some low. It's probably some low. It's probably 2%. Probably low. So it's not like these things can't happen. It's just that they're less likely. All these things with negative correlations in basketball and positive correlations in basketball, to me, it's a slightly less likely and slightly more likely. It's like, oh, you can't play Giannis and Middleton together. It's like, we've had several games this season when they both hit their ceilings in the same game, right? With Middleton being 8,000 and Giannis being 11K. So we've seen it before. Now, is it more likely to happen? No, but we've seen it before. Of course, Drew Holiday was out, but I mean, there are instances where these things happen. So it's not a matter of, no, you cannot possibly play these two guys together. Like, well, just consider that it's less probable. If that's the way that you're getting leverage and you don't mind taking a lower probability situation because you're playing a large field GPP, then shoot, then do it. You don't have to ask me. You don't have to. It's like, okay, it's less probable. But of course, when you're playing 80,000 entry contests, you're building lineups that have lower probability to begin with, because that's how you get first place. So I don't think you should necessarily be that concerned if it's so close. You know, err on the side of not taking the guy that's on the same team or taking the guy on the other side of the game. But other than that, I know I wanted to talk about correlation a bit, but because people in the Discord ask a lot of times, can I play this guy and this guy together, and that guy together? Can I play this guy and this side from? And most of the time, you're like, if you're spending more than 3 minutes on this, then the correlations aren't strong enough for you to worry so much about it. I tend to over correlate. I do it in football. I do it in basketball. Obviously, baseball, that's the way to play. You can't not do it in baseball.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I tend to overvalue correlation. It makes my choices easier, if anything.
And
Right?
that's when,
Right? That if the choice is going to be pretty like 50-50, I'm going to take the guy that's in the same game as so if I'm thinking that way, most of my lineups are going to look that way. If I'm in football, if I'm going to play this wide receiver and I have to play a cheap tight end, and I have the cheap tight end from the other side of the game in my pool, then I guess that's the one. I'd rather play that guy. He's at least in the same game. So I think more like that, and my lineups reflect that when I play NBA GPPs, and I'm willing to accept that when I do so, I will be locking myself out of the winning lineup sometimes, even with the same player pool. But there are other times where obviously I've won a ton doing it. So to me, it's not that I'm doing it to like overvalue correlation. It's just that it makes things so much simpler. When I'm hand building, it just makes it. If I'm going to play Zach LaVine, I'm probably going to play Jokic in that lineup tonight. I mean, okay, those are the two. If I'm going to play two stud lineups, and I'm going to say I'm going to play Zach LaVine and Jokic, not saying those two specifically, just I'm looking down. Those are the first two names I saw. Most likely, my Zach LaVine lineups will have Jokic in it and not them separated. Well, I have a lineup with LaVine, then I have a lineup with Jokic, then I have a lineup with LaVine. Because then it just, to me, that doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Why not put them together if they're going to be in the same line? If you're going to choose to play one and you're going to choose to play both, just play them together. Now, if you're only going to choose to play one, then you don't have to worry about it. But if you're going to choose to play guys from the same game, you might as well have them in the same line. Am I? To me, it's a simplification. If the correlation doesn't matter that much, James, doesn't even why not do it? But you can make the case, James, for the other side of since it doesn't matter that much, don't even worry about it. Don't even make groups and don't even care about it.
Well, one of the things that we talk about in the theory of DFS is trying to make it so that you have to be right about less things. That's huge. We don't necessarily want to have to nail a 9-player prop parlay of hitting their over on their fantasy points. We don't necessarily want to do that. In NFL, we absolutely do not want to do that. Like, you should try to be correlating as much as you can in NFL. In MLB, you do not want to be doing that. You don't want to take a 6-player home run prop on whatever site that you're betting on. If you're going to be not correlating anything in MLB, just go put together parlays of home run props on whatever site you bet at and just play that way, because that's what you're doing when you seed correlation in MLB. And I think in an NBA, there's certainly some virtue to that, where you are trying to be right about less things. If you are attacking a certain game environment, instead of playing a combination of 8 different players, if you're playing a combination of 5 different players and then 3 players from one game that you think is a really good game environment, then you have to be right about less things. You have to be right about that game environment, and then you have to be right about the other 5 players. So there's something good about being right about less, about needing less things to go your way in order for you to find success. When you're able to combine that kind of thought process of wanting to be right about less things, needing less things to go your way, as well as being able to identify where the obvious value is sitting. If you can combine those two thoughts, I think that'll put you in a good path towards proper roster construction for any DFS sport, especially NBA. And I think that you probably overcorrelate a little bit. Sure, you can admit that. I probably don't correlate enough. I probably am too math-based and too oh, well, this projection difference is a little bit too high. I don't know if I want to do that. But it comes down to the process of how you're going to be hand building and what things you want to need to be right about. And I think there's a lot of virtue to that, even in NBA, where I say all the time that there's no correlation that I worry about in NBA, but maybe I should worry about it a little bit more.
I don't think it's a matter of worrying or not worrying. I almost think that me being a little weighing correlation too much makes me more unique because I see on average the field doesn't.
I'd agree with that.
And even sharp players. Like I've talked to sharp players and they've even told me that I probably overvalue correlation in a lot of times. And which is fine, but I don't there's a difference between overvaluing correlation and ignoring projection. Right? Because you could yes, over correlating and then building a lineup that has a 40-point median lower than the optimal. Yes. Yeah. That would be over correlate. Yes. I'm not doing that. Right? Like completely. Who cares about the projections as long as I'm playing the same guys from the same teams and the same games and I'm stacking, right? I mean, even in baseball, when I'm stacking my vomit stacks, right? That also means I'm probably playing 2 stud pitchers. Like I'm getting the projection somewhere else. I'm playing Mike Trout in an outfield spot. I'm playing Gary. Well, I don't even know Gary Sanchez, Real Muto. So whoever I'm paying up a catcher. Gary Sanchez is just like either strikeout for weeks at a time.
And then he'll hit 2 home runs, and people will be like, "Gary Sanchez is back," and then he'll strike out
until the next thing. They have to wait 2 weeks for that to happen again.
Yeah.
But to me that's what I mean. That you shouldn't be like the correlation is never going to be to the sense where you're sacrificing so much projection in order to get it. But I mean, we could say that even in baseball. Should I do a 5-man or a 4-man stack? Well, I mean, if your 4-man stack lineup has a 7-point higher projection, like then just stack 4. Well, but DraftKings you're supposed to stack 5 guys. Like if that lineup is projected better and you still have the same amount of leverage and everything, then who cares? Well, but it's not correlated enough. Like the 1 extra batter is not going to matter, right? You're gaining 7 points in projection because now you're able to get, some pitcher or something. You know, Garrett Cole now.
Yeah.
Then fine, then do it. There's no like set rule. But then you'll look at my lineups and be like, all you do is stack 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. Yeah, because I'm building 100 lineups and it's easier to just like, I'm going to screw those examples of 4-man stack lineups because then if I now try to introduce 4-man stack lineups, it's going to take me twice as long to build everything because now I have to weed through everything. So my general strategy is just 5X and just whatever. And just like I'm jamming in as much as I can. I'm doing my exposures. I'm setting the stack rules. And then if the 4-man stack lineup wins, then tomorrow's another day. But it's not that I'm against the 4-man stack in baseball to do a 4-3-1 type of lineup on DraftKings. It's just that it's easier to do those in different builds. So if you if you have 100 lineups, you're like, I'm going to do 80 of one and 20 of the other. It's probably best to do 2 different builds to get those, which obviously increases the time that you have to build lineups. So if you were to say, I want to do all 4-3-1s, that's fine. If you want to do all 5Xs, that's fine too. I mean, like, to me, the EV difference between the lineups are probably not going to be that dramatic that if you don't end up on 4-man stacks, then no, so be it. Or if you don't do any 5-man stacks, okay, for a specific slate. But I view the same thing with this NBA correlation. If I'm hand building, it doesn't matter. I'm just looking through going, if I'm going to play LaMelo Ball and I need a small forward in the, some cheaper range, well, Derek Jones Jr. doesn't pop or anything, but no one else does in that range. And I need someone in that spot. Am I going to take Garrett Temple or I'm going to take Derek Jones Jr.? Well, LaMelo Ball's playing the Blazers. So more likely I'm going to I'll take the guy in the Blazers rather than take a Chicago guy and I'm not playing any Denver, right? If I'm playing Jokic, maybe I played Garrett Temple, right? I mean, like, to me, those decisions, what's the worst thing that happens? Oh, you should have played Derek Jones Jr. with Jokic and not the 2 sides of the game. Like, they both project about the same. Like, what does it matter at that point? But I'm almost making the argument for and against. What does it matter? So why bother doing it? I'm saying, what does it matter? So why not do it? So have we gotten anywhere by arguing this?
Yeah, I think that we have gotten to a point of letting people know that they need to think about things in actually, I think the best point that we have made here is saying that if all things else are equal, small correlations are worthwhile, right?
Could be worthwhile.
Well, I mean, for you, like they're worthwhile when you hand
Yeah.
vote. Yeah. So I think, and I agree with that like if all things equal, like, back when I had that Jason Tatum, Zion Williamson decision, if it were like a 3 to 5 point difference, yeah, sure. I'll go Zion because like that game needs to stay close. And knowing that intuitively, knowing that the only way that these players find their ceilings is if the game is close, then I'll go with that. But that's because the other things were equal. It was the same position. It was nearly the same projection. It was a situation where I needed some sort of a tiebreaker. In NBA, the tiebreaker can be the positive or the negative correlation. And remember that we are talking almost specifically about NBA here because we care a lot about correlation in other sports and with NFL and MLB. But for NBA, I think that it's a worthwhile tiebreaker. And a lot of people have different things for tiebreakers, and I think that's fine too. I tell people the defensive efficiency metrics on my site. Somebody asked me how I utilize those since they're already baked in the projections. I'm like, well, they're already baked in the projection, so I don't really care that much about them. But if I have two players at the same position, if everything else is equal, and if I need a tiebreaker, like I'm gonna go look. And if one guy has an 18% boost to his fantasy point production, and the other guy only has like a 2% boost, like I'll probably choose the guy with the bigger boost because maybe it helps him find a ceiling. But these small edges that you are looking for, it matters a lot more when you have a lot of lineups, but these small edges, correlation, negative correlation, boosts, whatever, they matter a lot more when you're looking for a tiebreaker, when you're looking for other things that are equal. I think that's when you really should be kind of like, whatever, just go for it.
Yeah, but if you ignored it, it probably wouldn't make a difference until you have a much larger sample size.
Yeah, sure.
Because if you have a correlation coefficient of, let's say, 0.04, like really, how, right?
That's
I mean,
nothing.
like what you're going to need such a large sample size to even like recognize that it even exists, right? So that's why I wanted to bring it up. I want to explain why I do it and say that it's not the be all end all. It's not like like in basketball specifically, because a lot of people, you come from NFL, we've seen this. You come from NFL. Oh, I'm going to decide to play NBA DFS, and I've gotten tons of emails. Right in the beginning of the NBA season, people that play NFL DFS never played NBA DFS. Their first question is, how do I build correlation? Because in NFL, we're talking about game stacks and run backs and all that type of stuff. It's like, how does that work in NBA? And I have to tell, it really doesn't. And then they throw their hands up in the air and they go, how the hell am I supposed to build lineups now? Like in NFL, like half of your lineup is correlated to each other. And then the other half is kind of like one-offs and then secondary correlations, running back, wide receiver, those types of things. And then I have to tell people in NBA, no, you could just kind of just throw in 8 or 9 guys in a lineup and usually fine. Usually
Have fun.
have fun. Have fun. It's usually fine. If you didn't care about correlation, you probably wouldn't notice the difference. But then sometimes I get burned by that. Sometimes I force in correlations and I go, well, I couldn't have made that winning lineup because in all of my X lineups, I would have had this guy that had a snowflake in it because that's what I did. But when I'm right, obviously I crush. So that's the other side of the spectrum.
Well, and you are, of course, okay with losing a lot of the time and having those times when you crush be the times when you make your bread,
Right.
and that's another part that we'll talk about at some point if we haven't already talked about it enough in both the theory DFS and on here is risk aversion. Some people have different goals and different circumstances of when they are playing and how they are playing GBPs and how they're playing DFS. And maybe if you have less risk aversion, you're caring less about the correlations. Is that what I'm saying?
Yeah, I would think so. Right, correlation
Yeah.
would increase your variance. I would assume so.
Yeah, in
Right.
NBA for sure. So
Right.
I think that that's the other thing. You have to understand how and why you're playing GPPs. If you're not okay with losing 96, 97% of the time, so the 3% of the time when you do care about correlations, and that one game that, the Denver Chicago game where he had Levine and Jokic that goes into double OT and both those guys put up 85 fantasy points, and Levine is 3% owned and Jokic is 9% owned, and you built, a core around those guys. That 3% of the time, you're going to make enough money for all the 97% of the time that you were wrong, or that the
Right.
variance
That
is not
didn't get
100%.
there.
Right. So those kinds of things matter. If you are more risk averse and you are less accepting of that kind of volatility of that same game correlation, where it's a very small correlation, maybe you're not playing those guys together on purpose. Maybe you're just kind of letting the chips fall where they fall, or maybe you want to have exposure to that game, but with them in different lineups. You're saying that you want Levine or Jokic. It's all about the goals when it comes down to that kind of thing. And Jordan's goals are that he wants to be really, really right sometimes, but okay with being super duper wrong other times. And I'm the same way. And I think that's how I always preach that people should play GPPs. If you want to play in a way to cash a little bit more often, go play some double ups, go play some head to heads. But I think you have to be accepting of that volatility in GPPs.
Right. And we talk about this a lot in the Theory of Daily Fantasy Sports 15-hour audio masterclass. You go to theoryofdfs.com. We touched in a lot of what's in chapter 6, correlation. Talked a little bit about chapter 8, risk management, right there at the end. But here you go. Introduction, game objectives, player selection, expected value. Yeah, if you don't get expected value, you ain't gonna. That's probably the most important concept. Leverage, correlation, construction, risk management, exploits, psychology, miscellaneous stuff. So go pick it up. It's a 15-hour audio masterclass. All of these concepts, all of everything. It's a structured education. It's like going to a seminar for 15 hours. And you could listen to it over and over again and pick up new things. You play and then you listen. And then a month later, you play for a bit. MLB is coming up and you're like, okay, I'm gonna before the new start of a season or something, you could listen to it again. And these concepts will not go away as long as DFS exists. Like you could listen to this 10 years from now and it would apply. So
Even I still listen to it.
theoryofdfs.com. What'd you say?
I said even I still listen to it. Like
You listen to yourself?
I do. I listen to both of us. Yeah, there's
Oh.
good concepts, dude. Like I particularly listen to the player selection chapter because I think that's one of the most valuable chapters in the entire audio course. And there are some times when I have to like remind myself of some of the things that we talk about. Yeah.
But you don't realize I had to edit this. So like I've heard this
yeah, you've heard it so many times,
right? I had to listen to it so many times in order to edit it down.
Yeah.
So if you want to pick this up, theoryofdfs.com. James, you're at paydirt_DFS. Is there a time period where people, because of the baby, can't mention you on Twitter?
No. Okay. So you can follow me on paydirt_DFS. Most of the time, I think I might rebrand as a dad Twitter. So, if you're following me for DFS, that's fine, but I'm going to make a lot more dad jokes. So just be prepared for that. You can also find me over at paydirt_ghost.io. That is my DFS and sports analytics site. Doing a lot of work on optimizer building and focusing on the daily sports, Counter-Strike, League of Legends, NBA. Also have PGA. I have every sport for $30 a month is pretty good. So you can find all my work there, and I'm going to start back up on the Twitch stream here pretty soon. I'll start having links for that as well. So
it's like you become a dad, and next thing you know, now you have more time to do stuff.
No, I'm just more inspired. I'm just like, I just want to grind harder. I want to grind harder for him. I never want him to worry about things. So I want to work and give him a good life.
Okay. So check out James there. And you can follow me on Twitter, blenderhd, as always. Hit those thumbs ups on your way out. Hit the thummy thumbs. Either way. If you don't like kids, just hit the thumbs down. Me, I don't have any kids. James, you made the worst EV decision of your entire life. For the next good 18 to 21 years, It's just all negative EV. It's just all complete. It's like you have to do a tax on your winnings now.
You got to read up on life utility, life utils. Read up on the Black Swan or How Not to Be Wrong. David Kahneman, good.
I don't
author.
see a utility for a kid. What utility?
Utility is the happiness that the child brings you. It's not all.
I don't get happiness from having a kid. Why would I want some little dude that looks like me eating my shit? No, get out of here.
Because I can make jokes with him and he can play video games with me.
I can make jokes with other people.
It's going to be the proudest moment of my life, the day that he gets to beat me at poker. Proudest day of my life.
Why would I don't want my kid to beat me at poker. I want to win. I want to win my kid's money. Is he going to get a job immediately so I can win money from him and play him in DFS and then he'd go broke? Like, that's what I'm saying. I don't want to have fortune. Come on. Get the happiness of having a kid. I'll have the happiness of having more money.
Yeah.
And more freedom. You'll think differently like 12 years from now, probably.
We'll see. We'll revisit this conversation in 12 years.
Right. We'll see. We'll see what's correlated. Let's see if the kid and happiness are correlated to each other. Let's see. Okay. So James will be back next Monday, as usual, for Mondays with McCool. Me. I'm going to be on even during the All-Star break, even though there's no slates, like on some of these days. We're still having the pregame show. So I don't know what the hell we'd be talking about, but I'll probably be answering questions and stuff. We'll hang out and chat. Maybe some baseball stuff. Maybe the All-Star game has like a showdown. Maybe we start talking about maybe a showdown strategy. So I'll be here Monday through Friday. It never ends. If you don't see a show that's some technical difficulty, I'm dead, right? Or something like that, right? If there's no show in the morning, most likely. So tune in every day, every weekday, Monday through Friday, 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern Time, to the DFS pregame show here on RotoGrinders.com.